空戦の成績がいい。
両手に使う。
Godzilla Minus One stands as one of the most emotionally powerful and artistically ambitious entries in the long-running Godzilla franchise. Released in 2023, the film reimagines the legendary monster not merely as a destructive creature, but as a terrifying symbol of national trauma, survivor's guilt, and post-war devastation. Written, directed, and visually supervised by Takashi Yamazaki, the movie blends intimate human drama with large-scale kaiju destruction in a way that deeply honors the origins of Godzilla while also presenting something modern and emotionally resonant. The film's title itself carries enormous symbolic meaning. Minus One refers to Japan's condition immediately after World War II. The nation had already been reduced to ruin after the war, effectively leaving the country at zero. Then Godzilla appears, pushing the country even further into despair, into Minus One. This concept is central to the film's emotional and thematic structure. Rather than focusing only on spectacle, the movie examines what it means for ordinary people to continue living after unimaginable destruction. It asks whether a broken nation can rebuild itself when another nightmare arrives before healing has even begun. One of the strongest aspects of the film is its historical setting. Unlike many modern monster movies that occur in contemporary times, Godzilla Minus One takes place in post-war Japan during the late 1940s. This setting is essential because the original 1954 Godzilla was itself created as a metaphor for nuclear destruction and the trauma of World War II. Takashi Yamazaki returns to those roots with remarkable seriousness and emotional depth. Japan in the film is physically destroyed, economically shattered, and psychologically wounded. Citizens struggle to survive among ruins, black markets, hunger, and grief. The atmosphere constantly reminds viewers that the people have already endured catastrophic suffering before Godzilla ever appears. At the center of the story is Koichi Shikishima, played by Ryuunosuke Kamiki, a former kamikaze pilot haunted by post-traumatic stress disorder and survivor's guilt. His character represents one of the film's most important themes, the emotional scars left by war. During World War II, kamikaze pilots were expected to sacrifice themselves for Japan. However, Shikishima survives after failing to complete his mission. In the eyes of others, and especially in his own mind, he believes he failed his country. This shame consumes him throughout the movie. The film's opening sequences immediately establish this emotional conflict. Shikishima lands on Odo Island claiming his plane has technical problems, but the truth is that he fears death and cannot force himself to carry out the suicide mission. Soon afterward, Godzilla attacks the island in a terrifying scene that changes his life forever. Shikishima has a chance to fire at the creature but freezes in fear. Many people die because he cannot act. This moment becomes the foundation of his trauma. He blames himself for every death and carries that guilt long after the war ends. What makes the film so compelling is that Godzilla becomes connected to Shikishima's psychological state. The monster is not simply an external threat. It represents fear, guilt, death, and unresolved wartime trauma. Every appearance of Godzilla feels emotionally personal. Whenever the creature attacks, it forces Shikishima to confront the failures and fears he has tried to bury. In this sense, the movie operates both as a giant monster film and as a deeply human character study. Takashi Yamazaki's direction deserves enormous praise because he balances intimate emotional storytelling with large-scale destruction. Many blockbuster films focus primarily on action while neglecting character development. Godzilla Minus One does the opposite. The emotional lives of the characters always remain central. The audience cares about the people because the movie spends time exploring their fears, relationships, and hopes. As a result, every Godzilla attack feels horrifying rather than merely exciting. The supporting cast also plays a major role in building the emotional realism of the story. Minami Hamabe portrays Noriko, a young woman struggling to survive in post-war Tokyo. She forms an unconventional family with Shikishima and an orphan child named Akiko. Their relationship gives the film emotional warmth amid overwhelming despair. Noriko represents resilience and hope. While Shikishima remains trapped by guilt and trauma, she encourages him to keep living and rebuilding his life. The family dynamic is especially important because it contrasts with the destruction surrounding them. Japan after the war is fractured, yet these characters slowly create a sense of home and emotional connection. Their small household symbolizes the country's attempt to rebuild itself from the ashes. This emotional core gives the movie tremendous heart. Viewers are not just watching cities collapse, they are watching vulnerable human beings struggle to protect the fragile happiness they have managed to create. Another key element is the film's portrayal of ordinary citizens rather than government institutions or military power. In many Godzilla movies, governments and advanced technology dominate the narrative. In Godzilla Minus One, however, Japan's government is weak and overwhelmed after the war. Resources are limited, and the country lacks military strength because of post-war restrictions. This creates a sense of helplessness that intensifies Godzilla's threat. As a result, ordinary people must take responsibility for fighting back. Former soldiers, engineers, sailors, and civilians unite to confront the monster using creativity and determination instead of overwhelming firepower. This approach makes the story feel grounded and human. The heroes are not superheroes or elite warriors. They are damaged survivors trying to reclaim their dignity and future. Godzilla himself is portrayed in an especially terrifying manner. Unlike some recent interpretations that present the creature as an anti-hero or protector, this version of Godzilla is closer to a force of nature or living nightmare. He is merciless, destructive, and almost unstoppable. His design combines classic Godzilla elements with modern realism, making him appear both iconic and horrifying. The film's visual effects are particularly impressive considering its relatively modest budget of around $10 million. Compared to massive Hollywood blockbusters costing hundreds of millions of dollars, Godzilla Minus One achieved astonishing visual quality through careful craftsmanship, artistic discipline, and efficient filmmaking. The visual effects team at Shirogumi spent 8 months creating the monster sequences, and their work demonstrates remarkable attention to detail. The destruction scenes carry enormous weight because they are filmed with emotional realism rather than exaggerated spectacle. Buildings collapse with terrifying force, civilians run in panic, and entire city blocks vanish in seconds. One of the most unforgettable moments involves Godzilla unleashing his atomic breath. Instead of simply functioning as a flashy weapon, the sequence resembles a nuclear explosion. The shockwave, fire, and devastation evoke imagery associated with atomic bombings, reconnecting the monster to its symbolic origins as a metaphor for nuclear horror. Takashi Yamazaki also drew inspiration from filmmakers such as Hayao Miyazaki and Steven Spielberg. This influence can be seen in the film's emotional storytelling and visual composition. Like Miyazaki's work, the movie balances melancholy, humanity, and hope. Like Spielberg's films, it understands how to create suspense, wonder, and emotional connection through cinematic pacing and character focus. The pacing of the movie is another major strength. Rather than rushing from one action scene to another, the film carefully develops tension and emotional stakes. Quiet scenes between characters are given importance, allowing viewers to connect deeply with their struggles. When destruction finally occurs, it feels devastating because the audience understands what is being lost. An important theme throughout the film is survival versus sacrifice. During the war, Japan glorified self-sacrifice, especially through kamikaze missions. Shikishima internalizes this ideology and believes his survival makes him weak or dishonorable. However, the movie gradually challenges this mindset. It argues that living, despite fear, pain, and guilt, requires courage too. This thematic conflict becomes central to Shikishima's character arc. Throughout the story, he learns that survival is not cowardice. Choosing to continue living and protecting others can be more meaningful than dying for abstract ideals. This message gives the film profound emotional power because it critiques wartime nationalism while honoring the resilience of ordinary people. The film's emotional climax is especially effective because it resolves both the external conflict with Godzilla and the internal conflict within Shikishima. His journey is ultimately about overcoming fear and self-hatred. By confronting Godzilla directly, he symbolically confronts the trauma that has haunted him since the war. The climax therefore works on both spectacle and psychological levels. Another reason the movie resonated strongly with audiences worldwide is that it returned Godzilla to his horror roots. Over the years, some entries in the franchise became more fantastical or action-oriented. While those films have their own appeal, Godzilla Minus One restores the creature's terrifying presence. Godzilla is not treated as a cool action hero. He is a walking catastrophe whose appearance inspires dread and despair. At the same time, the film avoids becoming overwhelmingly bleak because it also emphasizes hope and human resilience. Even in a broken world, people continue helping one another, rebuilding homes, forming families, and searching for meaning. This balance between darkness and hope gives the story emotional richness. The production history of the movie is also fascinating. After Shin Godzilla in 2016, Toho temporarily could not produce another live-action Godzilla film because of agreements involving Legendary Entertainment's MonsterVerse franchise. When Takashi Yamazaki completed The Great War of Archimedes in 2019, Toho executive producer Minami Hamabe selected him to develop a new Godzilla project. Development began in March 2019, and Yamazaki spent several years refining the screenplay, partly because the COVID-19 pandemic delayed production. Interestingly, these delays may have benefited the film creatively. The extended development period allowed Yamazaki to carefully shape the story and emotional themes rather than rushing production. Filming eventually took place from March to June 2022 in the Chubu and Kanto regions of Japan. Despite the limited budget, the filmmakers achieved extraordinary scale and realism. Much of this success came from disciplined visual planning and strong storytelling priorities. Instead of relying purely on expensive effects, the film focused on emotional engagement and carefully constructed sequences. The title announcement in 2023 generated enormous excitement among fans because it signaled a return to standalone Japanese Godzilla storytelling separate from Hollywood's MonsterVerse continuity. Upon release, the film received widespread acclaim from critics and audiences. Many praised its emotional depth, historical atmosphere, visual effects, and respectful treatment of Godzilla's symbolic legacy. One of the film's greatest achievements is how it appeals to both longtime Godzilla fans and newcomers. Fans appreciate the references to earlier films and the restoration of Godzilla's terrifying symbolism. Meanwhile, new audiences can connect with the story because it functions as a powerful human drama even without prior franchise knowledge. The movie also demonstrates that blockbuster cinema does not require enormous budgets to achieve greatness. Through strong writing, emotional sincerity, disciplined direction, and artistic vision, Godzilla Minus One creates a cinematic experience that rivals or surpasses many far more expensive productions. Its success became an important example of how storytelling and craftsmanship matter more than sheer financial scale. Ultimately, Godzilla Minus One is far more than a monster movie. It is a meditation on trauma, guilt, survival, and national recovery. By setting the story in post-war Japan and focusing on deeply human characters, Takashi Yamazaki transforms Godzilla into both a terrifying physical threat and a symbolic representation of historical pain. The film honors the original meaning of Godzilla while introducing new emotional complexity and cinematic sophistication. The result is a modern masterpiece that combines spectacle with emotional depth in rare fashion. It captures the horror of destruction while also celebrating the resilience of ordinary people who continue living after catastrophe. Through its unforgettable characters, haunting imagery, and powerful themes, Godzilla Minus One proves that the Godzilla franchise still possesses enormous artistic potential nearly 70 years after the monster first emerged from the sea. The release and global success of Godzilla Minus One marked one of the most important moments in the history of the Godzilla franchise. More than simply becoming a commercial hit, the film redefined how international audiences viewed Japanese kaiju cinema. Directed by Takashi Yamazaki, the movie achieved something very rare. It satisfied longtime Godzilla fans while also earning widespread praise from mainstream critics and general audiences around the world. Its release strategy, critical reception, box office performance, awards recognition, and cultural impact together transformed the film into a landmark achievement for both Japanese cinema and the Godzilla franchise itself. The film first premiered at the Shinjuku Toho building on October 18, 2023. This location carried symbolic importance because the Shinjuku Toho building has become closely associated with Godzilla's cultural identity in Japan. The giant Godzilla head overlooking Tokyo from the building has become an iconic tourist attraction and a visual reminder of the franchise's enduring popularity. Holding the premiere there connected the film directly to the legacy of the monster and celebrated the historical importance of the series. The official Japanese theatrical release occurred on November 3, 2023, a carefully chosen date because it commemorated the 70th anniversary of the Godzilla franchise. The original Godzilla film debuted in 1954, meaning Godzilla Minus One arrived exactly 7 decades after the birth of one of cinema's most famous monsters. This anniversary gave the movie enormous symbolic weight. It was not just another sequel or reboot, it was positioned as a celebration of the franchise's history and legacy. This context increased audience expectations significantly. Godzilla is more than a fictional character in Japan. The monster represents generations of filmmaking history, cultural memory, and artistic evolution. Over 70 years, Godzilla transformed from a terrifying metaphor for nuclear destruction into a global pop culture icon appearing in films, television shows, comics, video games, and merchandise. Releasing a major film on the franchise's 70th anniversary meant that Godzilla Minus One carried the responsibility of honoring everything that came before it while also proving the series could still evolve creatively. Takashi Yamazaki approached this challenge with remarkable respect for the franchise's roots. Instead of focusing only on nostalgia or visual spectacle, he returned to the emotional and thematic foundations that made the original 1954 Godzilla so powerful. The result was a film that felt both classic and modern at the same time. Many viewers felt that Godzilla Minus One captured the true spirit of Godzilla better than many previous installments because it restored the monster's emotional and symbolic weight. The Japanese release generated tremendous excitement among fans. Audiences were eager to see how Toho would commemorate such an important anniversary. Early reactions praised the film's emotional storytelling, historical atmosphere, and terrifying depiction of Godzilla. Viewers especially appreciated that the movie treated the monster seriously rather than simply as an action spectacle. Soon afterward, Toho International released the film in North America on December 1, 2023. This international release proved extremely significant because Japanese live-action films sometimes struggle to achieve wide theatrical exposure in Western markets. However, Godzilla Minus One quickly gained momentum through strong word-of-mouth, glowing reviews, and enthusiastic audience reactions. One of the most fascinating aspects of the film's success was the difference between its domestic critical reception and its international acclaim. Japanese critics gave the film a more mixed response compared to the overwhelmingly enthusiastic reception from Western critics. Some Japanese reviewers admired the emotional ambition and visual effects, while others felt the film relied too heavily on melodrama or traditional storytelling techniques. This mixed domestic response demonstrated how differently cultural audiences sometimes interpret the same work. In contrast, Western critics embraced the film with extraordinary enthusiasm. Many described it not only as one of the best Godzilla films ever made but also as one of the best films of 2023 overall. Critics praised its emotional depth, human storytelling, visual craftsmanship, and thematic complexity. What impressed many reviewers most was the film's ability to function as both a powerful drama and a thrilling monster movie simultaneously. For decades, some Western audiences viewed Godzilla movies primarily as campy entertainment or nostalgic genre cinema. While the franchise always had dedicated fans, mainstream critical respect was inconsistent. Godzilla Minus One changed that perception dramatically. Critics who might normally dismiss kaiju films were forced to acknowledge the movie's emotional sophistication and cinematic quality. A major reason for this acclaim was the film's emphasis on character-driven storytelling. Many blockbuster movies prioritize action sequences over emotional engagement, but Godzilla Minus One placed human suffering, trauma, and resilience at the center of the narrative. Western critics especially praised Ryuunosuke Kamiki's performance as Koichi Shikishima, a former kamikaze pilot struggling with survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress disorder. The emotional realism of his character elevated the film beyond typical monster movie conventions. Critics noted that Godzilla in the film was not merely a destructive creature but also a symbolic representation of fear, guilt, and post-war trauma. This thematic depth resonated strongly with international audiences because it connected spectacle with meaningful emotional storytelling. Another major factor behind the film's acclaim was its visual effects work. One of the most astonishing aspects of Godzilla Minus One was its relatively modest budget. The film reportedly cost around $10 million, which is extremely small compared to modern Hollywood blockbusters that often exceed $200 million. Despite this limitation, the movie delivered visual effects that many critics considered superior to far more expensive productions. Western reviewers repeatedly expressed amazement that a film made with such a comparatively small budget could look so cinematic and immersive. The destruction scenes, creature animation, ocean sequences, and large-scale devastation all appeared remarkably convincing. Instead of relying purely on overwhelming digital excess, the visual effects were carefully integrated into the storytelling. Godzilla himself became one of the most praised aspects of the film. Critics loved the creature's terrifying presence and destructive power. Unlike some modern portrayals that depict Godzilla as a heroic or morally neutral figure, Godzilla Minus One returned the monster to his horror roots. This version of Godzilla felt cruel, unstoppable, and genuinely frightening. His atomic breath scenes became especially iconic because they resembled nuclear explosions rather than simple energy attacks. The film's international success also reflected a growing appreciation for Japanese cinema worldwide. Streaming platforms and global film distribution have allowed international audiences to access a wider range of foreign films than ever before. As a result, viewers have become more open to subtitled movies and non-Hollywood storytelling styles. Godzilla Minus One benefited from this changing cinematic landscape. At the box office, the movie became a massive success. It grossed approximately $116 million worldwide, an extraordinary achievement considering its budget and genre. This performance made it the third highest-grossing Japanese film of 2023 and the most successful Japanese-produced Godzilla film ever made, surpassing Shin Godzilla. This financial success carried enormous significance for Toho and the future of Japanese blockbuster filmmaking. For years, Hollywood's MonsterVerse films dominated global Godzilla discussions with enormous budgets and large-scale spectacle. While those movies achieved commercial success, Godzilla Minus One demonstrated that Japanese filmmakers could still produce Godzilla stories capable of competing internationally through emotional depth, artistic vision, and creative discipline. The film's box office triumph also showed the enduring global popularity of Godzilla as a cultural icon. Even after 70 years, audiences remain fascinated by the monster because each era reinvents him in different ways. Some versions emphasize political allegory, others focus on science fiction adventure, and others lean into action spectacle. Godzilla Minus One succeeded because it reconnected the character to themes of human suffering and national trauma while presenting them in a modern cinematic style. Awards recognition further elevated the film's reputation. At the 47th Japan Academy Film Prize, the movie received a leading 12 nominations and won 8 awards. This level of recognition demonstrated that the film was respected not only as genre entertainment but also as serious cinema within Japan's film industry. The awards acknowledged multiple aspects of the production, including visual effects, direction, cinematography, sound, and storytelling. Such recognition was especially important because genre films often struggle to receive prestigious awards consideration. Monster movies are frequently overlooked in favor of dramas or historical epics. Godzilla Minus One broke through these barriers because of its artistic quality and emotional impact. Perhaps the film's most historic achievement came at the 96th Academy Awards, where it won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects. This victory carried tremendous symbolic importance. It marked the first Godzilla film ever to win an Academy Award and represented a major triumph for Japanese filmmaking on the global stage. The Oscar win was particularly inspiring because of the film's limited budget compared to its competitors. Many Hollywood visual effects productions involve massive teams and enormous financial resources, yet Godzilla Minus One proved that creativity, craftsmanship, and storytelling could compete with sheer scale. The victory became a celebration of artistic ingenuity and efficient filmmaking. The visual effects team's achievement gained widespread admiration because they accomplished so much with comparatively limited resources. Instead of overwhelming viewers with constant digital spectacle, the effects were carefully designed to maximize emotional impact. Every explosion, wave, and creature movement served the story rather than existing purely for visual excess. The Academy Award win also introduced the film to even broader audiences. Many viewers who had not previously considered watching a Japanese Godzilla movie became curious after hearing about its critical acclaim and Oscar success. This expanded the film's cultural influence far beyond traditional genre fandom. Another reason the movie became so influential was its ability to bridge generational gaps among audiences. Older Godzilla fans appreciated the return to serious themes and emotional storytelling reminiscent of the original 1954 film. Younger viewers connected with the modern visual effects and character-driven narrative. International audiences unfamiliar with Godzilla history could still enjoy the film because it functioned as a standalone story. The success of Godzilla Minus One also sparked discussions about the future of blockbuster filmmaking. Many critics contrasted its emotional sincerity and disciplined storytelling with the formulaic tendencies of some modern franchise movies. The film demonstrated that audiences still value carefully crafted narratives with strong characters and meaningful themes. Takashi Yamazaki's role in the film's success cannot be overstated. As writer, director, and visual effects supervisor, he maintained a unified artistic vision throughout production. This creative consistency gave the movie a strong emotional identity. Every aspect of the film, from performances to visual design, worked together toward the same thematic goals. Yamazaki's storytelling approach emphasized empathy and humanity even amid large-scale destruction. He understood that audiences care more about spectacle when they are emotionally invested in the characters experiencing it. This philosophy distinguished Godzilla Minus One from many effects-driven blockbusters that prioritize visual chaos over emotional resonance. The announcement of a sequel, Godzilla Minus Zero, scheduled for release in November 2026, further demonstrates the enormous impact of the film's success. The sequel announcement generated tremendous excitement because audiences became deeply attached to the world and emotional tone established in Godzilla Minus One. The title Godzilla Minus Zero itself suggests another symbolic exploration of Japan's condition and historical struggles. Fans immediately began speculating about how the sequel might continue the themes of trauma, rebuilding, and survival introduced in the first film. Expectations are extremely high because Godzilla Minus One set a new artistic standard for the franchise. Importantly, the film's legacy extends beyond financial success or awards recognition. It restored a sense of artistic prestige to the Godzilla franchise. While Godzilla has always been culturally iconic, not every installment achieved deep critical respect. Godzilla Minus One reminded audiences and critics alike that Kaiju cinema can address profound human emotions and historical anxieties while still delivering thrilling entertainment. The movie also reinforced the idea that genre cinema can contain serious artistic value. Science fiction, fantasy, horror, and monster films are sometimes dismissed as less meaningful than traditional dramas, yet Godzilla Minus One demonstrated how genre storytelling can explore trauma, guilt, survival, and hope in emotionally powerful ways. Ultimately, the release and reception of Godzilla Minus One represented a historic moment for cinema. Premiering during the franchise's 70th anniversary, the film honored Godzilla's legacy while reinventing the monster for a new generation. Through emotional storytelling, stunning visual craftsmanship, critical acclaim, box office success, and major awards recognition, the movie became far more than another franchise installment. It proved that Godzilla still possesses enormous creative potential after 7 decades. More importantly, it showed that audiences worldwide continue to connect with stories that combine spectacle with humanity, destruction with emotion, and horror with hope. Godzilla Minus One did not simply celebrate the past of the Godzilla franchise, it helped shape its future. The opening portion of Godzilla Minus One is one of the most emotionally powerful and thematically rich introductions in the history of the Godzilla franchise. Rather than immediately focusing on large-scale destruction or action spectacle, the film begins with fear, guilt, trauma, and human suffering. Takashi Yamazaki carefully constructs a narrative that connects the monster directly to the emotional wounds of post-war Japan. Every event in this early section of the story establishes the psychological foundation for the entire film. The story begins in 1945, near the end of World War II, during one of the darkest periods in Japanese history. Japan is losing the war, cities are being destroyed, and desperation dominates the military atmosphere. In this context, the film introduces Koichi Shikishima, a kamikaze pilot tasked with sacrificing his life for his country. From the beginning, Shikishima is not portrayed as a fearless hero. Instead, he is exhausted, terrified, and emotionally broken before the main conflict even begins. This immediately separates Godzilla Minus One from many traditional war films or action stories. The movie does not glorify war or heroic sacrifice. Instead, it explores the emotional damage created by militarism and impossible expectations. Shikishima represents thousands of young men forced into situations where fear and survival became sources of shame. The kamikaze program itself plays a major symbolic role in the story. During World War II, kamikaze pilots were expected to die intentionally by crashing their planes into enemy targets. These missions were portrayed as honorable acts of patriotism and sacrifice. However, the film challenges this ideology by showing the immense psychological burden placed on these young pilots. When Shikishima lands his Mitsubishi A6M0 on Odo Island, he claims his plane requires repairs. However, the lead mechanic, Sasaku Tochibana, quickly realizes the truth. The plane is functional, and Shikishima is pretending there is a technical problem because he cannot bring himself to carry out the suicide mission. This moment immediately establishes one of the film's central themes, survival guilt. Shikishima fears death, but he also fears being judged as a coward. The tension between self-preservation and social expectation becomes central to his character arc. He is trapped between his instinct to live and the wartime ideology demanding his sacrifice. Tochibana's reaction reflects the harsh mentality of the era. He sees Shikishima's hesitation not as human fear but as dishonor. This confrontation is emotionally devastating because both men are victims of the same wartime system. Tochibana himself is exhausted and bitter from years of war. He has internalized the belief that dying for Japan is the highest duty. Therefore, Shikishima's refusal to complete his mission appears selfish and disgraceful in his eyes. The tension escalates dramatically that same night when Godzilla attacks Odo Island. This sequence is one of the most terrifying and important scenes in the film because it introduces Godzilla not merely as a monster, but as a symbol of uncontrollable horror. Unlike some previous Godzilla films where the creature appears gradually or mysteriously, this version arrives with sudden brutality. At this stage, Godzilla is not yet the fully mutated giant monster seen later in the movie. Instead, he resembles a gigantic prehistoric predator. Even in this earlier form, however, he is terrifyingly powerful. The darkness of the island, the panic among the soldiers, and the creature's overwhelming violence create an atmosphere closer to horror cinema than traditional blockbuster spectacle. The attack sequence also becomes the defining traumatic event of Shikishima's life. Tochibana desperately tells him to fire the plane's cannons at Godzilla. At this moment, Shikishima has an opportunity to save lives and redeem himself in the eyes of others. Yet fear overwhelms him once again. He freezes completely. This paralysis is psychologically important. The film does not portray Shikishima as weak in a simplistic sense. Instead, it realistically depicts how trauma and terror can immobilize human beings. In life-threatening situations, people often freeze rather than act rationally. Shikishima's inability to shoot reflects the collapse of his emotional state under extreme stress. The consequences are horrifying. Godzilla massacres the soldiers and destroys the base. Shikishima survives only because he is knocked unconscious during the chaos. When he awakens the following day, nearly everyone is dead except Tochibana. This scene becomes one of the emotional turning points of the movie. Tochibana's anger toward Shikishima is intense and deeply personal. He blames him for the deaths of the men on the island because Shikishima failed to fire at Godzilla when given the chance. Whether or not shooting the cannons would actually have stopped the creature is almost irrelevant. What matters emotionally is that Shikishima believes he failed yet again. This moment defines the survivor's guilt that haunts him throughout the film. He survived while others died, and he cannot forgive himself for it. The guilt becomes even more painful because it connects to both the war and Godzilla simultaneously. Shikishima feels responsible for failing his country as a kamikaze pilot and for failing the men on Odo Island during the monster attack. The war then ends, but peace brings no relief. Shikishima returns home expecting familiarity and comfort, only to discover that Tokyo has been devastated by bombing raids. His parents are dead, and his home is destroyed. This sequence powerfully illustrates the condition of post-war Japan. The city ruins symbolize a nation emotionally and physically shattered by war. There is no victory celebration, no heroic return, and no sense of pride. Instead, there is emptiness, grief, and despair. Shikishima survived the war, but he returns to a life stripped of meaning and stability. The film's portrayal of Tokyo after the war is extremely important because it grounds the story in historical realism. Japan in 1945 faced widespread destruction, poverty, homelessness, and psychological trauma. Entire neighborhoods had vanished under bombing campaigns. Families were separated or killed. Millions struggled simply to survive. In this devastated environment, Shikishima meets Noriko Oishi and the orphaned baby Akiko. Noriko's parents were also killed during the bombing of Tokyo, making her another survivor of national catastrophe. Together, these characters represent ordinary civilians trying to rebuild their lives from the ruins of war. The relationship between Shikishima, Noriko, and Akiko becomes one of the emotional cores of the film. At first, their connection is not romantic or idealized. It emerges out of necessity and shared loneliness. They are people without families, homes, or security trying to create some form of human connection in a broken world. Akiko's presence is especially symbolic. As an orphan child rescued from destruction, she represents the future generation of Japan, innocent, vulnerable, and dependent on survivors to rebuild society. Caring for her gradually gives Shikishima a new sense of responsibility and purpose. However, his survivor's guilt never disappears completely. Even while building this fragile family, he remains psychologically trapped by memories of the war and the Odo Island massacre. This internal conflict gives the film emotional complexity. Shikishima desperately wants a normal life, but he cannot escape the belief that he does not deserve happiness because others died while he survived. The film further deepens its themes through Shikishima's new job aboard a minesweeper. This detail is symbolically brilliant. Naval mines are leftover weapons from the war, hidden beneath the ocean even after the fighting has ended. Clearing them becomes a metaphor for dealing with the lingering dangers and trauma left behind by conflict. The minesweeper crew itself consists largely of ordinary men trying to survive in post-war Japan. They are not glorious heroes or elite warriors. They are damaged survivors navigating dangerous remnants of the past. This reflects the broader message of the film. Even after war officially ends, its consequences continue haunting society. Meanwhile, the story reveals that Godzilla has been transformed by nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll. This development reconnects the creature to the original symbolic meaning of Godzilla as a metaphor for nuclear destruction. In the original 1954 film, Godzilla emerged because of hydrogen bomb testing, reflecting Japanese fears after Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and subsequent nuclear experiments. By including the Bikini Atoll tests, Godzilla Minus One emphasizes that humanity's destructive technologies continue creating new horrors even after World War II ends. Godzilla evolves from a terrifying prehistoric predator into an unstoppable nuclear nightmare. His mutation symbolizes the escalation of human violence through science and warfare. The destruction of ships like the USS Redfish demonstrates Godzilla's increasing power and foreshadows the catastrophe approaching Japan. Yet political tensions complicate the situation further. Because of growing Cold War conflicts with the Soviet Union, the United States offers limited assistance. This political detail adds another layer of realism and historical commentary. Japan, devastated and occupied after the war, exists within a fragile global power structure. International politics limit cooperation even in the face of enormous danger. The Japanese government is largely left to confront Godzilla with inadequate resources. The film also criticizes government secrecy and fear-driven decision-making. Officials avoid informing the public about Godzilla because they worry about causing panic in an already traumatized society. This reflects historical patterns where governments conceal dangers to maintain order or protect political stability. The decision not to warn civilians creates dramatic irony because viewers understand the scale of the threat while ordinary citizens remain unaware. It also reinforces one of the film's key themes. Institutions often fail during moments of crisis, leaving ordinary people to suffer the consequences. Another important aspect of this section is how carefully the movie balances intimate human drama with large-scale historical events. The story moves seamlessly between personal suffering and national catastrophe. Shikishima's emotional struggles mirror Japan's broader condition after the war. Both the man and the country are trying to rebuild themselves while carrying enormous psychological scars. Godzilla's presence amplifies these wounds rather than creating entirely new ones. The monster becomes the physical embodiment of unresolved trauma, destruction, and fear. Every attack reminds characters of the devastation they already experienced during the war. The emotional power of these scenes comes from the film's realism and sincerity. Takashi Yamazaki avoids exaggerated melodrama or simplistic patriotism. Instead, he presents war survivors as flawed, frightened, and emotionally exhausted human beings. This grounded approach makes the monster elements even more effective because they occur within a believable emotional world. Visually, the film also reinforces these themes through its depiction of ruined cities, dark oceans, and fragile homes. Post-war Japan appears vulnerable and unstable, making Godzilla's threat feel especially devastating. Unlike modern societies with advanced technology and massive militaries, this version of Japan barely has the strength to survive ordinary life, let alone fight a giant monster. Ultimately, this opening section of Godzilla Minus One establishes the film as far more than a traditional kaiju spectacle. It becomes a story about guilt, survival, trauma, and rebuilding after catastrophe. Through Shikishima's journey, the movie examines the emotional consequences of war and the difficulty of continuing to live after immense loss. Godzilla functions not only as a destructive creature but also as a symbolic manifestation of fear and historical pain. The monster emerges from humanity's violence and forces survivors to confront both external danger and internal wounds. By combining historical realism with emotional storytelling, the film creates a powerful foundation for the rest of the narrative. These early events ensure that every later battle against Godzilla carries emotional meaning. The conflict is not simply about defeating a monster. It is about whether broken people can overcome guilt, reclaim hope, and find the courage to live again in a world scarred by unimaginable destruction. The middle portion of Godzilla Minus One transforms the film from a story of personal trauma into a desperate struggle for survival against overwhelming destruction. These events deepen the emotional stakes, expand the scale of Godzilla's threat, and push Koichi Shikishima toward the climax of his emotional journey. Takashi Yamazaki uses these sequences not only to deliver thrilling action and large-scale devastation, but also to explore themes of guilt, revenge, sacrifice, collective responsibility, and humanity's determination to resist annihilation even when hope seems impossible. By May 1947, nearly 2 years after the end of World War II, Japan is still struggling to recover from devastation. The country remains economically weak, emotionally scarred, and militarily limited. Unlike traditional monster films where powerful governments and advanced armies immediately confront the creature, Godzilla Minus One portrays a nation barely capable of rebuilding basic stability. This vulnerability makes every encounter with Godzilla feel terrifyingly realistic. Shikishima's life at this stage has become more stable on the surface. He works alongside his Minesweeper crew, and his emotional bond with Noriko and Akiko continues to grow. However, beneath this fragile sense of normality, his trauma remains unresolved. Memories of Odo Island still haunt him, and Godzilla exists in his mind as both a literal monster and a symbol of his failures during the war. The mission to the Ogasawara Islands becomes the next major turning point. Shikishima and his crew are assigned the impossible task of slowing Godzilla's advance toward mainland Japan. Importantly, the mission is not about defeating the creature outright because nobody believes such a victory is possible. Instead, they are merely trying to buy time. This detail reflects the film's recurring theme of human helplessness in the face of overwhelming catastrophe. The Minesweeper crew itself symbolizes ordinary citizens forced into extraordinary circumstances. These are not elite superheroes or invincible soldiers. Most of them are survivors of war carrying emotional and physical scars. Their willingness to confront Godzilla despite their fear demonstrates the film's admiration for ordinary courage. They know they are outmatched, yet they continue fighting because there is nobody else to protect Japan. The sequence involving the sea mine is one of the film's first major demonstrations of human ingenuity against Godzilla. The crew releases a naval mine directly into the monster's mouth and detonates it. For a brief moment, it appears they may have achieved something meaningful. The explosion causes severe damage to Godzilla's face and internal tissues. This scene serves several important purposes. First, it shows that Godzilla is not completely invulnerable. Human weapons can injure the creature, even if only temporarily. Second, it creates hope among the characters and audience. After witnessing Godzilla's unstoppable destruction earlier in the film, the successful attack suggests humanity might have a chance to resist. However, the optimism vanishes quickly when Godzilla regenerates almost instantly. The creature's healing ability becomes one of the most horrifying aspects of the film. It transforms Godzilla from a dangerous monster into something almost supernatural, a living force of destruction that cannot easily be stopped. The regeneration also carries symbolic meaning. Godzilla represents trauma and violence that refuse to disappear. Just as Japan struggles to heal from war only to face new horrors, Godzilla continually recovers no matter how much damage it suffers. This creates a feeling of hopelessness that permeates the film. The arrival of the heavy cruiser Takao escalates the tension further. The ship's intervention initially seems powerful and reassuring. Large naval vessels traditionally symbolize military authority and national strength. In another type of movie, such a warship might dramatically turn the tide of battle. Instead, Godzilla Minus One subverts those expectations completely. Godzilla destroys the cruiser using its heat ray, one of the most visually terrifying moments in the film. The scene is not portrayed like a conventional action spectacle. It resembles mass annihilation. The heat ray itself is especially important in this version of Godzilla. Unlike earlier incarnations where the atomic breath often appears as a stylized energy beam, here it behaves more like a nuclear explosion condensed into a directed blast. The sequence builds tension slowly as Godzilla's dorsal plates begin glowing and cracking with energy. The atmosphere becomes ominously silent before the blast erupts with catastrophic force. The destruction of the Takao demonstrates that even military technology is almost meaningless against Godzilla. The monster's power surpasses anything humanity can reasonably fight. This reinforces the central horror of the film. Japan is facing another disaster on the scale of war and nuclear devastation, yet it lacks the resources to defend itself. After returning to Tokyo, Shikishima finally begins opening up emotionally to Noriko about his experiences with Godzilla. This moment is crucial because Shikishima has spent much of the film emotionally isolated by guilt and shame. His inability to discuss his trauma reflects the psychological damage many war survivors carried after World War II. Noriko's presence offers him emotional stability and acceptance. Unlike Tachibana, who viewed Shikishima through the lens of wartime duty and failure, Noriko sees him as a human being deserving compassion. Their relationship becomes increasingly important because it represents the possibility of healing and rebuilding life after trauma. The film carefully develops this emotional connection before destroying it in devastating fashion during the Ginza attack sequence. Godzilla's arrival in Tokyo marks one of the most unforgettable scenes in modern kaiju cinema. Unlike many monster attacks that emphasize spectacle or excitement, the Ginza destruction feels horrifyingly realistic and tragic. Ginza itself is symbolically important. As one of Tokyo's major commercial and cultural districts, it represents post-war recovery and modernization. The area symbolizes hope that Japan can rebuild itself after the war. By targeting Ginza, Godzilla attacks not just buildings but the fragile optimism of an entire nation. Noriko works in the district when Godzilla attacks, immediately personalizing the disaster for Shikishima. The sequence is filmed with extraordinary tension. Civilians run in panic, trains derail, buildings collapse, and military defenses fail instantly. The chaos feels grounded and terrifying because the film focuses heavily on ordinary people struggling to survive. When Noriko reunites with Shikishima during the attack, the emotional intensity becomes overwhelming. For a brief moment, there is hope they might escape together. However, the military's tank assault enrages Godzilla, triggering the creature's heat ray attack upon the city. This scene is arguably the emotional and visual centerpiece of the film. Godzilla unleashes its heat ray across Ginza, obliterating buildings, and killing tens of thousands in seconds. The imagery strongly resembles nuclear devastation. The blast wave, expanding destruction, and overwhelming force evoke memories of atomic bombings and wartime firebombings. The sequence is terrifying not only because of the scale of destruction but because of its emotional intimacy. Shikishima and Noriko are trapped inside the catastrophe. The audience experiences the disaster from the perspective of vulnerable civilians rather than distant observers. Noriko's sacrifice becomes one of the film's most heartbreaking moments. She pushes Shikishima to safety moments before the blast consumes her. This act fundamentally changes Shikishima's emotional state. Until this point, he has been haunted primarily by guilt over surviving while others died. Now he experiences another unbearable loss directly tied to Godzilla. The scene devastates him psychologically. Noriko represented hope, healing, and the possibility of a future beyond war trauma. Her apparent death destroys the fragile emotional stability he had begun building. Once again, Shikishima survives while someone else sacrifices themselves for him. This repetition intensifies his survivor's guilt dramatically. He feels cursed by survival itself. Every time he lives, someone else dies. The emotional weight of this realization pushes him toward despair and rage simultaneously. His vow of revenge against Godzilla therefore becomes deeply personal. Earlier in the film, his relationship with the monster centered on fear and guilt. After the Ginza attack, it transforms into hatred and determination. Godzilla is no longer merely a symbol of trauma, it has directly destroyed the life Shikishima was trying to rebuild. At the same time, the film introduces Kenji Noda's plan to destroy Godzilla. Noda represents another important aspect of post-war Japanese society, ordinary citizens forced to solve crises because official institutions are ineffective or paralyzed. Noda's frustration with government inaction reflects the broader political themes of the movie. Authorities remain hesitant, bureaucratic, and limited by post-war conditions. As a result, civilians and veterans take responsibility for defending the country themselves. The anti-Godzilla strategy is fascinating because it relies more on engineering and scientific creativity than military force. Noda proposes luring Godzilla into Sagami Bay and using Freon tanks to sink the creature deep underwater. The resulting pressure is intended to crush the monster. This plan reflects the film's grounded realism. Rather than inventing fantastical superweapons, the characters use practical scientific reasoning and improvised technology. The strategy feels believable within the world of the film, which makes the tension more effective. The backup plan involving balloons and explosive decompression adds further suspense. Noda understands that no strategy against Godzilla is guaranteed to work. The multiple contingencies reveal both his intelligence and desperation. Humanity is essentially experimenting in hopes of finding any weakness. The recruitment of former Navy veterans to operate decommissioned destroyers is also symbolically powerful. These men once fought for Imperial Japan during the war. Now they unite not for nationalism or conquest, but for survival and protection of civilians. This distinction is important because the film critiques wartime ideology while still respecting individual courage. The veterans are not glorified as soldiers of empire. Instead, they are portrayed as survivors choosing to risk themselves voluntarily to protect others. Meanwhile, Shikishima's decision to repair the Kyoshu J-7W Shinden fighter introduces another major emotional conflict. He plans to carry out a suicide attack against Godzilla by flying directly into its mouth with explosives aboard the plane. This plan creates enormous thematic tension because it appears to return Shikishima to the kamikaze role he originally rejected. At first glance, it seems he has come full circle. The man who once feared sacrificing himself now intends to die intentionally. However, the motivations are completely different. During the war, Shikishima was expected to die for nationalism and military ideology. Now, he chooses sacrifice out of personal responsibility, grief, and a desire to protect innocent people. Still, the film deliberately questions whether this decision represents courage or despair. Is Shikishima finally overcoming his fear, or is he simply consumed by guilt and self-hatred? This ambiguity gives the story emotional complexity. His reunion with Tachibana is equally significant. Tachibana has every reason to hate Shikishima for what happened on Odo Island. Yet their cooperation in repairing the aircraft suggests the possibility of reconciliation and mutual understanding. Tachibana's involvement also symbolizes unfinished emotional business between the two men. The repair process becomes more than mechanical work, it is part of confronting the trauma they both carry from the war and Godzilla's first attack. Before leaving, Shikishima entrusts Akiko to Sumiko's care. This quiet scene carries enormous emotional weight because it resembles a father saying goodbye to his child before death. For perhaps the first time, Shikishima fully accepts his emotional role in Akiko's life. The moment also emphasizes what is truly at stake. Godzilla threatens not only cities and nations but also fragile human relationships and future generations. Akiko symbolizes hope for the future, and Shikishima's willingness to fight is ultimately tied to protecting that future. By the time Godzilla resurfaces, the film has transformed into both an epic battle for survival and a deeply personal emotional reckoning. Every character carries scars from war and loss, yet they choose to confront the monster despite overwhelming odds. This section of Godzilla Minus One succeeds because it combines thrilling spectacle with profound emotional storytelling. The destruction scenes are terrifying not simply because of visual scale, but because the audience deeply understands what the characters stand to lose. Godzilla represents destruction, trauma, and unstoppable violence, while the human characters represent resilience, connection, and the desperate desire to protect life after catastrophe. Through these intertwined conflicts, the film elevates itself beyond traditional monster cinema into a powerful meditation on survival, grief, sacrifice, and hope in the aftermath of unimaginable devastation. The climax and conclusion of Godzilla Minus One deliver one of the most emotionally powerful endings in the entire Godzilla franchise. What begins as a desperate military operation against an unstoppable monster ultimately becomes a deeply human story about guilt, forgiveness, survival, and the decision to keep living after unimaginable trauma. Takashi Yamazaki combines large-scale spectacle with emotional resolution in a way that transforms the finale into something far greater than a conventional monster battle. Every action in these scenes carries symbolic meaning, and every character decision reflects the film's larger themes about post-war Japan, personal redemption, and the value of life itself. As the final operation against Godzilla begins, the atmosphere is filled with tension and uncertainty. Unlike many blockbuster finales that emphasize confidence and heroic certainty, the characters in Godzilla Minus One understand that their plan may fail completely. Godzilla has already survived naval attacks, explosives, military resistance, and extreme damage. The creature appears almost immortal. The mission therefore feels less like a guaranteed victory and more like a desperate gamble by ordinary people who have no other choice. Shikishima's role in the operation is especially important because it represents the culmination of his emotional journey. Earlier in the film, he was paralyzed by fear and crushed by survivor's guilt. He believed himself to be a coward for refusing to die during the war and for failing to act during Godzilla's attack on Odo Island. Throughout the story, these memories haunted him and prevented him from accepting happiness or peace. Now, however, he voluntarily places himself in extreme danger to protect others. On the surface, this seems like a transformation from cowardice into heroism. But the film deliberately complicates this interpretation. Shikishima's plan still contains elements of self-destruction. He intends to fly directly into Godzilla's mouth and detonate explosives, essentially carrying out the suicide emotional ambiguity that makes the finale far more meaningful than a simple redemption story. Is Shikishima finally acting bravely, or is he still consumed by guilt and self-hatred? The film gradually reveals that the answer lies somewhere in between. As Shikishima lures Godzilla toward the trap prepared by the destroyers, the operation unfolds with extraordinary suspense. The strategy devised by Kenji Noda relies on physics and engineering rather than overwhelming military power. This detail reflects one of the film's central ideas: post-war Japan lacks the resources and military might to confront Godzilla directly, so ordinary citizens must rely on creativity, cooperation, and determination instead. The destroyers guide Godzilla into position while Freon tanks are detonated around the creature, forcing it downward into the ocean depths. The plan aims to use water pressure itself as a weapon. This approach feels grounded and realistic, which makes the sequence more intense because it operates within understandable physical logic rather than fantasy science. The underwater descent of Godzilla is one of the most visually striking moments in the movie. The monster sinks deeper and deeper beneath the ocean surface while pressure builds around its massive body. For a brief moment, it appears humanity may finally succeed. The characters and audience alike feel cautious hope. However, the film quickly reminds viewers that Godzilla is not easily defeated. The creature survives the crushing depths and breaks free from the trap. This moment reinforces Godzilla's role as a symbol of unstoppable destruction and recurring trauma. Every time humanity believes it has overcome catastrophe, the monster rises again. The second phase of Noda's plan then activates. Balloons force Godzilla upward rapidly, causing severe decompression-induced barotrauma. The concept is scientifically grounded but also symbolically meaningful. Godzilla, a creature empowered by unnatural nuclear forces, is being torn apart by the laws of nature themselves. The decompression injuries visibly damage the monster, showing that the strategy is partially working. Godzilla suffers terrible wounds, yet remains alive and enraged. This balance is important because it preserves the creature's terrifying power while still allowing humanity to make progress against it. At this stage, the emotional and thematic weight of the climax becomes even stronger because victory depends not on a single heroic individual but on collective cooperation. Mizushima organizes a fleet of tugboats to help haul Godzilla toward the surface. Ordinary civilians and workers become essential participants in the battle. This imagery carries enormous symbolic significance. Throughout the film, governments and official institutions repeatedly fail or hesitate. In contrast, ordinary people unite voluntarily to protect one another. The tugboats represent civilian resilience and solidarity. They are humble working vessels, not war machines, yet they play a crucial role in humanity's resistance. The sight of these small boats pulling against the monstrous weight of Godzilla becomes one of the film's most powerful visual metaphors. It symbolizes fragile human determination struggling against overwhelming destruction. The people fighting Godzilla are not invincible heroes. They are survivors refusing to surrender despite impossible odds. Godzilla's rage intensifies as it prepares to unleash its heat ray against the surrounding ships. This moment creates unbearable tension because viewers understand the catastrophic power of the weapon. Earlier in the film, the heat ray annihilated Ginza and killed tens of thousands in seconds. The audience knows that if Godzilla fires again, the fleet and everyone aboard it will be destroyed instantly. The build-up to the heat ray attack is terrifyingly effective. Godzilla's dorsal plates glow as energy gathers within its body. The atmosphere becomes ominously silent, emphasizing the scale of destruction about to occur. This silence is one of the film's greatest strengths because it creates dread rather than relying solely on noise or chaos. At the last possible moment, Shikishima flies the Shinden fighter directly into Godzilla's mouth. This action serves multiple emotional and symbolic purposes simultaneously. On one level, it is the completion of the mission he failed to carry out on Odo Island. Earlier in the film, fear prevented him from firing his plane's weapons into Godzilla's mouth. Now he confronts the monster directly without hesitation. This parallels his unfinished psychological conflict from the beginning of the story. On another level, however, the scene is not simply about atonement through death. The film carefully reframes the meaning of sacrifice. During the war, kamikaze pilots were expected to die for ideology and nationalism. Shikishima's current mission is different because it is motivated by love, responsibility, and the desire to protect innocent lives. This distinction is essential. The film critiques the wartime glorification of suicidal sacrifice while still acknowledging that courage sometimes requires risking one's life. Shikishima's growth lies not in learning how to die, but in learning why life matters. The destruction of Godzilla's head becomes one of the most visually spectacular moments in the movie. The explosives detonate inside the monster, disrupting the energy of the heat ray and causing catastrophic internal destruction. The accumulated nuclear energy tears Godzilla's body apart from within. This scene works symbolically because the monster is effectively destroyed by its own power. Godzilla's nuclear energy becomes self-destructive, reflecting the broader anti-war and anti-nuclear themes of the film. Humanity's violent technologies ultimately create forces that threaten to destroy everything, including themselves. For a moment, the audience believes Shikishima has sacrificed himself. The crew watches in horror and grief, convinced he died in the explosion. Yet suddenly, his parachute appears in the sky. This reveal transforms the emotional meaning of the climax is not merely a plot twist or mechanical detail. It represents the film's ultimate thematic message. Tachibana originally hated Shikishima for surviving Odo Island and failing to fight Godzilla. He believed Shikishima needed to die honorably to atone for his perceived cowardice. However, over time, Tachibana recognizes the destructive nature of that mindset. He comes to understand that survival is not shameful and that continuing to live requires courage too. By secretly installing the ejection seat, Tachibana symbolically rejects the ideology that demanded meaningless sacrifice during the war. His decision becomes an act of forgiveness and compassion. He no longer wants Shikishima to die for redemption. Instead, he wants him to live beyond guilt. This emotional resolution is one of the most profound aspects of Godzilla Minus One. The film ultimately argues that healing does not come through self-destruction. True redemption comes from accepting life despite trauma and loss. The crew's celebration when Shikishima survives reflects this thematic shift. Earlier in the story, survival brought shame and guilt. Now survival becomes a victory worth celebrating. The emotional meaning of living has completely changed. The film then transitions into its emotional epilogue, where Shikishima returns home exhausted and emotionally transformed. Sumiko gives him the telegram intended for him earlier, leading him to a hospital where he discovers Noriko is alive. This reunion scene is deeply moving because Noriko represented hope throughout the film. Her apparent death pushed Shikishima into despair and revenge. Discovering she survived gives him another chance at the life he thought had been destroyed forever. The reunion also completes the film's exploration of healing and rebuilding after catastrophe. Shikishima began the story emotionally isolated and convinced he did not deserve happiness. By the end, he has confronted his trauma, survived the battle with Godzilla, and regained the possibility of family and emotional connection. However, the scene is not entirely comforting. Noriko bears a strange black bruise spreading across her neck, suggesting lingering consequences from Godzilla's attack. This detail introduces ambiguity and unease into the ending. The bruise may symbolize radiation poisoning, mutation, or some lingering connection to Godzilla's destructive power. Regardless of the exact interpretation, its presence reinforces one of the film's core themes: trauma does not disappear completely. Even after victory, scars remain. This subtle detail prevents the ending from becoming unrealistically optimistic. The characters survive, but they are permanently changed by what they experienced. Recovery is possible, yet the memory and consequences of destruction continue shaping their lives. The final image of Godzilla's regenerating flesh sinking into the ocean deepens this ambiguity further. The monster is not entirely gone. A fragment of it continues regenerating beneath the sea. This ending serves several important functions. On a practical level, it leaves open the possibility of future sequels. More importantly, however, it reinforces the symbolic meaning of Godzilla throughout the film. Godzilla represents recurring trauma, violence, and destruction born from humanity's darkest impulses. Such forces are never completely eliminated. Even when defeated temporarily, they retain the potential to return. The regenerating flesh also reflects historical reality. Post-war Japan rebuilt itself after catastrophe, but the memories of war, nuclear devastation, and suffering remained embedded within society. Healing is ongoing rather than final. One of the most remarkable achievements of this ending is how it balances hope and uncertainty. The film does not conclude with total despair, nor does it offer simplistic triumph. Instead, it presents survival as complicated but meaningful. Shikishima's emotional journey embodies this message perfectly. He begins the story believing survival is shameful. He ends it understanding that continuing to live, despite grief, guilt, and trauma, requires immense strength. This transformation gives the movie extraordinary emotional depth. The climax is not simply about defeating a monster. It is about rejecting destructive ideologies that glorify death and learning to value human life again. Takashi Yamazaki's direction during these scenes is masterful because he never loses sight of emotional intimacy even amid massive spectacle. The visual effects are stunning, but the true power of the finale comes from character relationships, psychological resolution, and thematic meaning. The ending also restores Godzilla to the symbolic roots that made the original 1954 film so important. Godzilla is not merely an action monster or entertainment icon here. The creature embodies nuclear terror, wartime trauma, and humanity's capacity for self-destruction. At the same time, the human characters embody resilience, compassion, and the possibility of rebuilding after catastrophe. This contrast gives Godzilla Minus One its emotional and philosophical power. Ultimately, the climax and conclusion succeed because they transform a giant monster film into a deeply human story about survival and healing. Through Shikishima's journey, the film argues that redemption is not achieved through death, but through choosing to continue living and protecting others despite pain and loss. The result is one of the most emotionally resonant endings in modern cinema, a finale that combines thrilling spectacle with profound humanity, leaving audiences moved not only by Godzilla's destruction, but by the fragile courage of the people who survived it. The extraordinary critical reputation of Godzilla Minus One represents one of the most remarkable success stories in modern cinema. What began as a Japanese kaiju film celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Godzilla franchise eventually evolved into a globally respected cinematic achievement praised not only by longtime fans of monster movies but also by mainstream critics, film historians, and international audiences. The film's placement among the highest-rated movies of 2023 and its recognition as one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made reveal how deeply it resonated across cultures and genres. For decades, Godzilla movies occupied a complicated place in global cinema culture. While the franchise remained iconic and influential, critical attitudes toward the series often fluctuated between admiration and dismissal. Some entries were praised for political symbolism and emotional depth, while others were viewed primarily as camp entertainment or nostalgic spectacle. Godzilla Minus One fundamentally changed that conversation because it proved that a Godzilla film could simultaneously function as blockbuster entertainment, historical drama, emotional character study, horror film, and artistic cinema. Its extremely high rating on Rotten Tomatoes became one of the clearest indicators of this achievement. Remaining among the top-rated films of 2023 demonstrated not only popularity among genre fans but also widespread critical consensus. Critics from different backgrounds, countries, and cinematic preferences united in their admiration for the movie's storytelling, visual craftsmanship, emotional depth, and thematic complexity. This level of acclaim is especially significant because 2023 was a highly competitive year for cinema. Many major Hollywood productions, international dramas, award contenders, and blockbuster franchises were released during that period. For a Japanese-language monster movie to rank among the highest-rated films of the year revealed how powerfully it transcended genre expectations. The fact that Godzilla Minus One maintained the highest certified critical rating for a Godzilla film even after the release of Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire further highlights its unique status within the franchise. Over 70 years, dozens of Godzilla films explored different tones and creative directions. Some focused on horror, others on action-adventure, science fiction, fantasy, satire, or even family entertainment. Yet Godzilla Minus One achieved a balance that many critics considered definitive. One major reason for this exceptional reputation is the film's return to the emotional and symbolic roots of Godzilla. The original 1954 Godzilla emerged from the trauma of World War II and the fear of nuclear destruction. Over time, some franchise installments moved away from these themes in favor of larger action spectacles or lighter storytelling. While many of those films remain beloved, Godzilla Minus One restored the creature's terrifying emotional significance. Critics and audiences repeatedly praised how the movie treated Godzilla not merely as a giant monster but as a symbol of collective trauma, grief, and destruction. The creature once again became horrifying rather than heroic. This version of Godzilla inspired dread because the film connected the monster directly to post-war suffering and survivors' guilt. The movie's emotional realism played a major role in elevating its reputation. Many monster films struggle to create meaningful human drama alongside large-scale destruction. Godzilla Minus One succeeded because the human story remained central at all times. Critics frequently noted that viewers genuinely cared about the characters rather than simply waiting for action scenes. Koichi Shikishima's emotional journey became one of the most celebrated aspects of the film. His trauma as a failed kamikaze pilot, his survivor's guilt, and his struggle to rebuild a meaningful life gave the movie emotional gravity rarely associated with blockbuster monster cinema. The story explored themes of shame, fear, loss, and redemption with sincerity and nuance. This emotional depth allowed the film to resonate even with audiences unfamiliar with Godzilla history. Many viewers who normally had little interest in kaiju films found themselves deeply moved by the human drama. In this sense, Godzilla Minus One achieved what the greatest genre films accomplish: it used fantastical elements to explore universal human emotions. The movie's placement on various Best Godzilla Films of All Time lists further reflects its enormous cultural impact. Ranking near the top on publications such as Variety, Vulture, IndieWire, and Entertainment Weekly demonstrated widespread agreement among critics that the film represented one of the franchise's greatest achievements. These rankings are significant because the Godzilla series spans multiple generations, filmmaking eras, and creative philosophies. Comparing Godzilla Minus One to classics such as the 1954 original, Shin Godzilla, or beloved entries from the Showa and Heisei eras places it within a rich cinematic tradition. The fact that many critics considered it one of the very best entries after only a short period indicates how strongly it impressed audiences. Variety ranking the film second among all Godzilla movies is especially meaningful because Variety traditionally focuses on the broader film industry rather than only genre cinema. Such recognition suggests that Godzilla Minus One was appreciated not merely as fan service but as serious filmmaking. Similarly, Vulture, IndieWire, and Entertainment Weekly all highlighted different aspects of the film's excellence. Some praised its emotional storytelling, others emphasized its visual artistry or thematic ambition. Together, these rankings reflected a broad consensus that the movie succeeded across nearly every cinematic category. Another major aspect of the film's reputation involves its identity as a horror movie. Although Godzilla films often contain elements of science fiction and action, Godzilla Minus One reintroduced genuine terror into the franchise. Critics and audiences repeatedly described the creature as frightening in a way rarely seen in modern blockbuster cinema. The recognition from Far Out, which named it the best monster movie of the 21st century, speaks directly to this achievement. Monster cinema has evolved enormously over the past 2 decades, with countless films featuring giant creatures, alien invasions, zombies, and supernatural threats. Yet Godzilla Minus One distinguished itself because it combined terrifying spectacle with emotional intimacy. The movie's horror comes not only from Godzilla's size and power but from the realistic suffering surrounding the destruction. Civilians panic, families are separated, entire neighborhoods disappear, and survivors carry emotional scars. The film never treats destruction casually or playfully. The Ginza sequence especially contributed to the film's reputation as a terrifying cinematic experience. Godzilla's heat ray attack resembles nuclear annihilation more than traditional monster destruction. The expanding blast wave, collapsing buildings, and overwhelming devastation create genuine horror rather than simple action spectacle. CBR ranking the movie first among the 10 scariest creature features from the last 5 years reflects how effectively the film used tension and dread. Modern creature features often rely heavily on jump scares or non-stop action. Godzilla Minus One instead builds fear through atmosphere, emotional stakes, and the overwhelming inevitability of destruction. Another fascinating aspect of the film's acclaim is its inclusion on AGA.com's list of the 1,200 greatest films of all time. This recognition elevates the movie beyond genre boundaries entirely. It suggests that Godzilla Minus One is not simply an excellent monster movie but an important cinematic work worthy of preservation and long-term cultural discussion. Being included among all-time great films is significant because it places the movie alongside classics from vastly different genres, eras, and countries. Such recognition acknowledges the film's artistic achievement rather than merely its popularity or entertainment value. The movie's placement on Rotten Tomatoes' 300 Best Movies of All Time list further reinforces this status. Ranking among hundreds of internationally celebrated classics demonstrates how rapidly the film established itself as a modern cinematic landmark. This accomplishment is particularly remarkable considering the historical challenges faced by foreign-language genre films in mainstream Western criticism. For many years, subtitled science fiction or monster movies rarely received the same level of recognition as prestige dramas or art house productions. Godzilla Minus One overcame these barriers through the sheer strength of its storytelling and craftsmanship. The film's appearance in discussions surrounding the best movies of the 21st century also reflects its growing influence. Being included in redevoted rankings connected to the New York Times demonstrates that its reputation extends beyond critics into broader audience appreciation. Audience-driven recognition is important because it shows the movie created genuine emotional connections with viewers. Critics may admire technical skill or thematic depth, but widespread audience support usually depends on emotional impact. Godzilla Minus One succeeded because people did not simply respect it intellectually, they felt moved by it. One of the reasons audiences connected so deeply with the film is its universal themes. Although rooted in Japanese history and post-war trauma, the story explores emotions understood worldwide: guilt, grief, fear, survival, love, and hope after catastrophe. Shikishima's emotional struggle resonates far beyond its historical setting. His feelings of failure, survivor's guilt, and fear of happiness reflect deeply human experiences. Viewers empathize with his journey because the film portrays trauma honestly and compassionately. The movie's exploration of rebuilding after devastation also carries universal relevance. Post-war Japan in the film symbolizes societies and individuals attempting to recover from overwhelming loss. This emotional framework allows audiences from different cultures to connect with the story even if they know little about Japanese history. Another key factor behind the film's reputation is its technical achievement relative to its modest budget. Critics repeatedly expressed amazement that a movie made for around $10 million could rival or surpass far more expensive Hollywood productions in visual quality. The visual effects became legendary because they demonstrated extraordinary creativity and efficiency. Rather than overwhelming viewers with constant digital chaos, the effects were carefully integrated into the narrative. Every destruction sequence served emotional and thematic purposes. Godzilla's design and movement also received enormous praise. The creature feels massive, terrifying, and physically imposing in a way many modern CGI monsters fail to achieve. The filmmakers carefully emphasized scale, weight, and destructive force. The Oscar-winning visual effects contributed significantly to the movie's prestige. Winning the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects elevated the film into global cinematic history. It proved that artistry and innovation could triumph over enormous budgets. This victory inspired many filmmakers and critics because it challenged assumptions about blockbuster filmmaking. Godzilla Minus One demonstrated that emotional storytelling and disciplined craftsmanship matter more than sheer financial scale. Another reason the film remains so highly regarded is its tonal balance. Many modern blockbusters rely heavily on humor, self-awareness, or constant action pacing. Godzilla Minus One embraced sincerity instead. It treated its themes and characters with seriousness and emotional honesty. This sincerity gave the film emotional power. The movie never mocked its own premise or undercut dramatic moments with excessive jokes. As a result, viewers became fully immersed in the story's emotional reality. The film's pacing also contributed to its acclaim. Rather than rushing from one action sequence to another, the story allowed characters and relationships to develop gradually. Quiet scenes carried emotional weight, making the destructive sequences far more impactful. Critics frequently praised Takashi Yamazaki's direction for maintaining this balance. As writer, director, and visual effects supervisor, he ensured that every aspect of the film supported a unified artistic vision. Yamazaki's understanding of Godzilla's symbolic importance separated the film from more superficial franchise entries. He recognized that the monster's power comes not only from destruction but from what that destruction represents emotionally and historically. The movie's long-term legacy is already becoming apparent. Its success influenced discussions about the future of blockbuster filmmaking, international cinema distribution, and the artistic potential of genre storytelling. Many critics compared Godzilla Minus One favorably to major Hollywood productions, arguing that it succeeded because it prioritized character, theme, and emotional resonance over formulaic spectacle. This comparison sparked broader conversations about audience fatigue with repetitive franchise filmmaking. The film also helped strengthen appreciation for Japanese cinema internationally. While Japanese animation had already achieved enormous global popularity, live-action Japanese films sometimes struggled for mainstream Western visibility. Godzilla Minus One broke through those limitations and reached wide international audiences. Its reputation as one of the best horror films of the decade further reflects its cross-genre appeal. Although technically a kaiju movie, the film successfully incorporates elements of war drama, psychological trauma, disaster cinema, and horror. This genre hybridity is part of what makes the movie so powerful. It refuses to remain confined within narrow expectations. Viewers may arrive expecting a monster film but leave experiencing something emotionally profound and artistically ambitious. Ultimately, the extraordinary acclaim surrounding Godzilla Minus One exists because the film achieved something rare in modern cinema. It combined massive entertainment value with genuine emotional and thematic depth. It respected the history of the Godzilla franchise while reinventing its meaning for contemporary audiences. The movie reminded critics and viewers alike why Godzilla has endured for 70 years. Beneath the monster spectacle lies a story about humanity confronting fear, destruction, trauma, and survival. Godzilla Minus One captured those themes with exceptional artistry and sincerity. Its lasting reputation among the greatest Godzilla films, best monster movies, and even significant cinematic achievements of the 21st century reflects the film's remarkable ability to transcend genre boundaries and speak to universal human emotions. Through its powerful storytelling, unforgettable imagery, and emotional honesty, Godzilla Minus One secured its place not just in franchise history, but in modern film history itself. The cultural impact of Godzilla Minus One extended far beyond the success of a single movie. By the time the film completed its theatrical run and continued gaining recognition through awards, streaming popularity, and critical acclaim, it had become something much larger than a successful kaiju film. It evolved into a global cultural phenomenon that reshaped the international perception of Japanese popular culture, revitalized interest in the Godzilla franchise, and influenced both Hollywood filmmaking and worldwide entertainment trends. The movie's success demonstrated the enormous global appeal of Japanese storytelling when combined with emotional sincerity, artistic craftsmanship, and universal themes. Toho's description of the film as a global phenomenon was not simply promotional language. The worldwide response to Godzilla Minus One revealed how deeply the movie resonated across different cultures, age groups, and cinematic communities. Fans around the world transformed the film into a major pop culture event through online discussions, social media reactions, fan art, video essays, memes, and repeated theatrical viewings. This kind of global enthusiasm is particularly remarkable because Godzilla Minus One was not designed as a conventional international blockbuster in the Hollywood sense. It was primarily a Japanese-language film rooted deeply in Japanese history, specifically the trauma of World War II and the social devastation of post-war Japan. Yet audiences across the world connected emotionally with its themes of guilt, grief, survival, and resilience. One reason for this global impact was the film's emotional authenticity. Modern audiences increasingly value stories that feel sincere and emotionally meaningful rather than overly manufactured or formulaic. Godzilla Minus One stood out because it treated its characters and themes seriously. The movie did not rely heavily on irony, self-aware humor, or non-stop spectacle. Instead, it trusted emotional storytelling and human vulnerability. This sincerity allowed viewers from completely different cultural backgrounds to empathize with Koichi Shikishima's journey. His struggles with survivor's guilt, fear, trauma, and redemption were deeply human experiences that transcended language and geography. Even audiences unfamiliar with Japanese history could understand his emotional pain and connect with his search for meaning after catastrophe. The film's success also arrived during a period when Japanese popular culture was experiencing a significant resurgence in Western markets. For decades, Japan has influenced global entertainment through anime, manga, video games, fashion, and cinema. However, in recent years, several major Japanese productions achieved unprecedented international visibility simultaneously, creating what many observers viewed as a new cultural wave. Gavin J. Blair's observation that Godzilla Minus One contributed to the revival of Japanese popular culture in the West highlights how the film became part of a larger movement. Alongside projects such as Hayao Miyazaki's The Boy and the Heron, Netflix's live-action One Piece, and the television series Shogun, the movie demonstrated that international audiences were increasingly embracing Japanese storytelling styles and themes. This cultural shift is important because Western entertainment industries historically adapted Japanese concepts while sometimes overlooking the original creators and artistic traditions behind them. In contrast, the success of Godzilla Minus One showed audiences enthusiastically engaging with a distinctly Japanese film on its own terms. Unlike some international productions designed specifically to appeal to Western sensibilities, Godzilla Minus One remained deeply connected to Japanese identity, historical memory, and cinematic traditions. The movie's post-war setting, emotional restraint, themes of national trauma, and social atmosphere reflected Japanese cultural perspectives rather than trying to imitate Hollywood formulas. Its success therefore represented not just acceptance of a single movie, but broader appreciation for Japanese storytelling authenticity. Audiences proved willing to embrace subtitles, historical context, and emotionally grounded narratives when the filmmaking itself was compelling. The movie also played a major role in revitalizing and redefining the Godzilla franchise globally. Godzilla had always remained culturally iconic, but the franchise's identity shifted repeatedly over the decades. Some eras emphasized camp entertainment, others focused on science fiction spectacle, and recent Hollywood adaptations often portrayed Godzilla as a giant action hero battling other monsters. Godzilla Minus One reminded audiences why the original 1954 Godzilla became such an enduring cinematic symbol. The film restored the creature's terrifying emotional significance and reconnected the franchise to themes of war trauma, nuclear anxiety, and human suffering. Collider's statement that the film helped make the Godzilla series more popular than ever before reflects how dramatically it expanded mainstream interest in the franchise. Many viewers who previously had little engagement with Godzilla movies became fascinated by the series after experiencing Godzilla Minus One. This renewed popularity occurred because the movie balanced accessibility with thematic depth. Newcomers could enjoy it as a standalone emotional drama and monster thriller, while longtime fans appreciated its respect for Godzilla's symbolic roots and franchise history. The film also benefited from extraordinary word of mouth. In modern entertainment culture, audience enthusiasm spreads rapidly through social media platforms, reaction videos, podcasts, online reviews, and fan communities. Godzilla Minus One generated passionate recommendations because viewers felt emotionally moved rather than merely entertained. Many audience reactions emphasized surprise at how emotionally powerful the movie was. People entered theaters expecting a giant monster film and left discussing trauma, survival, grief, and redemption. This emotional impact encouraged viewers to recommend the film to friends and family who might not normally watch kaiju movies. Variety's suggestion that the film had already achieved legendary status by April 2024 reflects how quickly it became viewed as a modern classic. Usually, films require many years or even decades before critics and audiences fully recognize their long-term importance. Godzilla Minus One, however, inspired immediate comparisons to landmark cinematic achievements because of how strongly it resonated. Part of this rapid elevation came from the way the movie exceeded expectations. Many modern franchise films are viewed as predictable or creatively safe. Godzilla Minus One surprised audiences by delivering emotional complexity, historical depth, and artistic ambition within a genre often associated primarily with spectacle. The film's influence extended beyond criticism and audience discussion into the filmmaking industry itself. One of the clearest examples involves the tribute included in Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Director Adam Wingard and visual effects supervisor Alessandro Ongaro recreated the famous visual shot of the ground bursting beneath Godzilla's foot during the Rome sequence as a deliberate homage to Godzilla Minus One. This tribute demonstrates the level of respect Yamazaki's film earned within the professional filmmaking community. Hollywood directors and visual effects artists recognized the artistic power of specific imagery from the movie and chose to honor it in another major Godzilla production. The recreated shot itself is important because it symbolizes the immense physical weight and destructive presence of Godzilla in Minus One. The visual communicates terror through scale and force rather than relying purely on flashy digital spectacle. By referencing it, Godzilla x Kong acknowledged the influence of Yamazaki's more grounded and emotionally intense interpretation of the monster. This relationship between the two films is particularly fascinating because it illustrates how Godzilla Minus One influenced even the Hollywood monsterverse. The monsterverse films traditionally emphasized large-scale action, colorful spectacle, and monster battles. In contrast, Minus One focused heavily on emotional realism and horror. The success of Yamazaki's film reminded audiences and filmmakers alike that Godzilla works most powerfully when the creature feels frightening and emotionally meaningful rather than simply entertaining. This likely influenced broader creative discussions surrounding the future direction of the franchise. The positive word of mouth generated by Godzilla Minus One also appears to have benefited Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire commercially. This phenomenon demonstrates how one critically acclaimed film can revitalize interest in an entire franchise ecosystem. Audiences energized by Minus One became more engaged with Godzilla-related media generally, increasing excitement for subsequent releases. As a result, the Hollywood monsterverse benefited indirectly from the renewed cultural attention and enthusiasm surrounding the character. This effect highlights the interconnected nature of modern franchise culture. A successful film does not exist in isolation. It can elevate an entire brand, inspire new audiences, and strengthen global interest across multiple productions. Another fascinating aspect of the movie's influence was the creation of Food Lawsla, What Should Humanity Do?, a web short developed by Yamazaki and the visual effects team. This project demonstrated how the creative talents behind Godzilla Minus One gained increased visibility and opportunities after the film's success. The assignment also reflected growing recognition of the team's technical and artistic abilities. Their visual effects work had become internationally celebrated, particularly after winning the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. The industry now viewed Yamazaki and his collaborators as leading innovators in creature filmmaking and digital artistry. Importantly, the success of Godzilla Minus One elevated Takashi Yamazaki himself into a globally recognized filmmaker. Before the movie, he was respected within Japanese cinema but lacked widespread international fame. Afterward, he became one of the most discussed directors in global genre filmmaking. His inclusion in Gold House's list of the 100 most impactful Asians reflected this transformation. The recognition acknowledged not only the film's commercial success but also its cultural influence and artistic significance. Yamazaki's rise is especially meaningful because it represents international appreciation for Japanese filmmakers working outside the anime industry. While directors such as Hayao Miyazaki and Makoto Shinkai had already achieved global recognition through animation, live-action Japanese directors often faced greater barriers to mainstream Western visibility. Godzilla Minus One changed that dynamic by demonstrating that Japanese live-action filmmaking could compete directly with major Hollywood productions in emotional impact, visual quality, and cultural relevance. The film also influenced broader conversations about blockbuster filmmaking itself. Critics and audiences repeatedly contrasted its modest budget with the massive costs of many Hollywood tentpole films. Despite costing only a fraction of typical blockbuster budgets, Godzilla Minus One delivered visual effects and emotional storytelling many viewers considered superior. This sparked discussions about efficiency, creativity, and storytelling priorities within the film industry. Many commentators argued that the movie succeeded because it focused resources carefully and emphasized emotional stakes rather than non-stop excess. The visual effects became a particular source of admiration. Audiences and industry professionals were astonished by how realistic and cinematic the destruction sequences appeared given the film's relatively limited budget. This achievement inspired widespread respect for the craftsmanship and discipline of the visual effects team. The movie's global popularity also demonstrated changing audience attitudes toward foreign-language cinema. In previous decades, subtitled films often struggled to reach mainstream Western audiences outside art house circles. However, streaming platforms and increasing cultural globalization have made viewers more comfortable engaging with international storytelling. Godzilla Minus One benefited enormously from this shift. Audiences were willing to embrace the film in Japanese because the emotional and cinematic experience transcended language barriers. Its success therefore represented part of a larger transformation in global entertainment culture. International audiences increasingly seek authentic and emotionally compelling stories regardless of language or country of origin. The movie's impact on horror and monster cinema was equally important. For years, many large-scale creature films focused primarily on action and spectacle. Godzilla Minus One reminded filmmakers and audiences that monster stories can also function as emotionally devastating horror narratives. Godzilla in the film feels terrifying because the destruction carries emotional consequences. Entire communities suffer, civilians panic, and survivors endure lasting trauma. The movie restores a sense of dread and tragedy often absent from more playful monster spectacles. This approach influenced audience expectations for future kaiju films. After experiencing Godzilla Minus One, many viewers began demanding greater emotional depth and thematic sophistication from the genre. Ultimately, the film's global cultural impact stems from its ability to combine universal emotional storytelling with distinctly Japanese historical and artistic identity. It succeeded because it never compromised its sincerity or thematic depth in pursuit of international appeal. Instead, audiences embraced the movie precisely because of its authenticity. Through its exploration of trauma, survival, grief, and hope, Godzilla Minus One reminded viewers why stories matter beyond entertainment alone. The film became a cultural phenomenon not simply because it featured a famous monster, but because it offered something emotionally meaningful in an era when many audiences hunger for sincerity and artistic ambition. Its influence spread through pop culture, filmmaking, criticism, and global entertainment discussions because it represented a rare achievement, a blockbuster film with genuine emotional soul. In doing so, Godzilla Minus One revitalized not only the Godzilla franchise, but also broader appreciation for Japanese cinema and the enduring power of emotionally resonant storytelling on a global scale. The discussion surrounding a sequel to Godzilla Minus One became almost as fascinating as the film itself because the movie ended in a way that felt emotionally complete while simultaneously leaving enormous thematic possibilities unresolved. After the film achieved worldwide acclaim and became one of the most celebrated entries in the history of the Godzilla franchise, audiences naturally began wondering where Takashi Yamazaki and the surviving characters could go next. The interviews, public comments, and hints shared by Yamazaki and the cast during early 2024 revealed not only the possibility of a continuation, but also the deeper creative philosophy guiding the filmmakers as they considered expanding the story. One of the most important aspects of these discussions is that Yamazaki approached the idea of a sequel very carefully. Unlike many modern franchise productions where sequels are announced immediately for commercial reasons, Yamazaki emphasized that no official continuation had yet been fully planned in January and February 2024. This caution reflected the seriousness with which he viewed Godzilla Minus One as a complete emotional work rather than merely the beginning of a cinematic universe. The film's ending already carried strong emotional closure. Koichi Shikishima confronted his survivor's guilt, rejected suicidal self-destruction, and reclaimed the will to live. Noriko survived despite the devastation of Ginza, and Japan temporarily defeated Godzilla through collective human effort rather than military dominance. Because the story achieved such emotional resolution, any sequel would need to justify its existence artistically rather than simply repeating the same formula. Yamazaki's comments showed that he understood this challenge. Instead of immediately promising larger battles or more destruction, he focused on the emotional continuation of the characters' lives. This detail is extremely important because it reveals what made Godzilla Minus One so successful in the first place. The monster was never more important than the human story. His desire to continue following the same characters suggests that any future installment would remain emotionally grounded rather than becoming a disconnected spectacle. This approach distinguishes Godzilla Minus One from many blockbuster franchises where characters sometimes function mainly as vehicles for action sequences. In Yamazaki's vision, the emotional aftermath of survival matters just as much as the battle against the monster itself. The idea of revisiting these characters also carries thematic significance because the original film ended with the suggestion that trauma never completely disappears. Shikishima survived and found hope, but the scars of war and Godzilla's destruction remained visible. Noriko's mysterious black mark hinted that the consequences of Godzilla's existence still lingered physically and symbolically. This lingering trauma appears central to Yamazaki's concept for a sequel. His comparison to the Tatarigami curse from Princess Mononoke is one of the most revealing statements about the possible direction of the story. In Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, the Tatarigami represents a corrupted spiritual force born from hatred, violence, and suffering. The curse spreads destruction and pain while symbolizing humanity's inability to escape the consequences of conflict and environmental imbalance. By comparing Godzilla's aftermath to this curse, Yamazaki implied that the monster's impact on Japan extends beyond physical destruction. Godzilla may leave behind a lingering contamination, emotional, spiritual, psychological, or even biological. This idea transforms the creature into something even more terrifying and symbolic. In Godzilla Minus One, Godzilla already functions as more than a giant animal. The monster embodies nuclear trauma, wartime devastation, survivor's guilt, and collective fear. Expanding the concept into a curse-like presence suggests that future films could explore how societies continue living under the shadow of catastrophe long after the immediate destruction ends. This direction would align perfectly with the themes of the original film. Post-war Japan in Minus One struggled not only with rebuilding cities but also with emotional recovery. The war's trauma remained embedded within individuals and communities. A sequel exploring Godzilla as an enduring curse would deepen this metaphor significantly. The possibility that Noriko carries part of this curse is especially intriguing. Her survival during the Ginza attack already felt mysterious because she appeared to be directly exposed to Godzilla's devastating heat ray. The black bruise spreading across her neck implied that something unnatural remained within her body after the encounter. Yuki Yamada's suggestion that Noriko may possess Godzilla's cells introduces fascinating possibilities for both horror and symbolism. On a literal level, it could mean that exposure to Godzilla's radiation or regenerative biology altered her physically. This would connect the sequel more closely to classic science fiction and body horror themes. On a symbolic level, however, Noriko carrying part of Godzilla within her represents the way trauma becomes internalized by survivors. She survived catastrophe, but the experience permanently changed her. In this interpretation, Godzilla's cells are not simply biological contamination, they symbolize lingering psychological and societal wounds. Noriko's importance in a sequel could therefore become enormous. Instead of functioning only as Shikishima's emotional support or love interest, she might become directly connected to the mystery of Godzilla's survival and return. This would give her character greater narrative agency and thematic significance. Minami Hamabe's playful comment about potentially stepping on and crushing people if another film were made hints at another possibility, transformation. While partly humorous, the statement reflects fan speculation that Noriko's connection to Godzilla might evolve into something physically or psychologically dramatic. The Godzilla franchise has occasionally explored mutations, psychic connections, and human-monster relationships in previous eras. However, Yamazaki would likely approach such concepts with emotional realism rather than exaggerated fantasy. If Noriko changes in some way, the focus would probably remain on emotional consequences rather than spectacle alone. Sakura Ando's joking desire to become a Spider-Man-type woman taking down Godzilla similarly reveals the playful atmosphere surrounding sequel discussions among the cast. Yet beneath the humor lies evidence that the actors themselves became deeply invested in the world and characters created by the film. This investment matters because much of Godzilla Minus One's emotional strength came from the authenticity of the performances. The cast portrayed grief, fear, and resilience with sincerity rarely seen in large-scale monster movies. Any continuation would depend heavily on preserving that emotional realism. Another fascinating aspect of Yamazaki's sequel discussions involves the ocean. During the January 2024 stage greeting, he expressed interest in having the characters return to the sea in a future installment. This idea carries powerful symbolic meaning because the ocean plays a central role throughout Godzilla history. In Japanese cultural and historical memory, the sea represents multiple conflicting ideas: life, isolation, trade, war, destruction, and mystery. In Godzilla Minus One, the ocean is where Godzilla emerges, where many battles occur, and where remnants of war continue to linger through mines and military wreckage. Returning the characters to the sea would therefore reconnect them with unresolved trauma and danger. The ocean becomes a space where past horrors continue resurfacing, both literally and emotionally. The sea also symbolizes uncertainty and uncontrollable natural forces. Unlike cities, which represent human civilization and order, the ocean exists beyond full human control. Godzilla emerging repeatedly from the depths reinforces the idea that humanity cannot fully suppress the destructive consequences of its actions. Yamazaki's comments suggest that a sequel would likely preserve the darker and more introspective tone of Minus One rather than shifting toward pure action spectacle. This is important because the film's acclaim largely came from its emotional seriousness and thematic depth. Many fans feared that enormous success might pressure the franchise toward larger battles, expanded cinematic universes, or lighter blockbuster formulas. Yamazaki's statements reassured audiences that he remained more interested in emotional storytelling and symbolic meaning. His desire to include another antagonizing Kiju also generated major discussion. Godzilla films traditionally feature giant monster battles, and introducing another creature could create exciting new dynamics. However, Yamazaki's likely approach would differ significantly from the style of many previous monster vs. monster films. Rather than focusing solely on spectacle, another kaiju would probably serve thematic and symbolic functions. The creature could represent a different form of fear, trauma, or social crisis, contrasting with Godzilla's nuclear symbolism. The inclusion of another monster could also challenge Godzilla's role within the narrative. In Minus One, Godzilla functions almost like a force of nature or divine punishment. Introducing a second kaiju could complicate the moral and symbolic structure of the story. For example, humanity might become trapped between two destructive forces, reflecting Cold War anxieties or competing forms of catastrophe. Alternatively, the new monster might force characters to reconsider whether Godzilla itself is purely evil or part of a larger imbalance. Yamazaki's comments about beginning development on a new movie while denying it would necessarily be a direct sequel create another layer of intrigue. This ambiguity may reflect his desire to avoid creative restrictions. A direct sequel carries enormous expectations after the success of Godzilla Minus One. Audiences would expect emotional continuity, thematic depth, and equally powerful storytelling. By suggesting the new project may not be a straightforward continuation, Yamazaki preserved creative flexibility. This approach also aligns with the broader history of Japanese Godzilla cinema, where continuity often functions more loosely than in Hollywood franchise storytelling. Different films and eras reinterpret Godzilla according to changing historical anxieties and artistic goals. Yamazaki may therefore prefer creating another emotionally grounded Godzilla story connected spiritually or thematically to Minus One rather than constructing a conventional serialized narrative. Another crucial reason sequel discussions became so significant is that Godzilla Minus One fundamentally restored artistic prestige to the franchise. For many years, Godzilla existed simultaneously as a beloved cultural icon and a source of camp entertainment. While fans appreciated many lighter or action-focused entries, Minus One reminded global audiences that Godzilla stories could achieve profound emotional and thematic resonance. As a result, expectations for any continuation became extraordinarily high. Viewers no longer simply wanted bigger destruction scenes, they wanted emotionally meaningful storytelling that explored human experiences through the lens of monster cinema. This pressure likely influenced Yamazaki's cautious approach. He understood that repeating the original film mechanically would undermine what made it special. The challenge would be finding new emotional territory while preserving the sincerity and humanity that audiences loved. The sequel discussions also reveal how deeply viewers connected with the surviving characters. Unlike many disaster films where destruction overshadows personal relationships, Godzilla Minus One succeeded because audiences genuinely cared about Shikishima, Noriko, Akiko, Tochibana, Noda, and the Minesweeper crew. Fans wanted to know what happened to these people after surviving such overwhelming catastrophe. Could they truly heal? Would Japan rebuild successfully? Could Shikishima finally live without guilt? These emotional questions mattered as much as whether Godzilla would return. Ultimately, the discussions surrounding a potential sequel to Godzilla Minus One highlight the film's extraordinary achievement. The movie created a world and characters rich enough that audiences wanted continuation not merely for spectacle, but for emotional and thematic exploration. Yamazaki's comments suggest that any future installment would continue examining the lingering consequences of destruction rather than simply repeating monster attacks. The idea of Godzilla leaving behind a curse reflects the film's deeper understanding of trauma. Catastrophic events never disappear completely. They continue shaping individuals and societies long afterward. Whether through Noriko's mysterious condition, the ocean's lingering dangers, or the possibility of new monsters emerging from humanity's unresolved violence, a sequel appears poised to expand the emotional and symbolic universe of Godzilla Minus One while preserving the grounded humanity that made the original film resonate globally. In this way, the sequel discussions themselves became part of the film's legacy. They demonstrated that audiences were not only excited about seeing Godzilla again, they were emotionally invested in the people struggling to survive in the monster's shadow. The announcement and development of a new Godzilla film following the overwhelming success of Godzilla Minus One marked a major turning point not only for the franchise itself but also for modern Japanese blockbuster filmmaking. The discussions surrounding the future of the series revealed how seriously Toho viewed the cultural importance of Godzilla after Minus One achieved extraordinary critical acclaim, commercial success, and international recognition. Rather than rushing immediately into another production to capitalize on momentum, the studio demonstrated an unusually careful and deliberate approach that reflected deep respect for the legacy of the character and the emotional impact of the previous film. Producer Minami Ichikawa's statement that Toho wanted to take its time before producing another live-action Godzilla movie is one of the clearest examples of this philosophy. In modern franchise filmmaking, especially after a major hit, studios often prioritize speed and expansion. Sequels are frequently announced immediately, cinematic universes are planned years in advance, and commercial potential sometimes outweighs artistic consideration. However, Toho's response to Godzilla Minus One was notably different. Ichikawa emphasized that Godzilla deserves careful treatment, excellent ideas, a strong script, talented direction, and the right cast. This statement reveals the extent to which Godzilla Minus One changed the status of the franchise in contemporary cinema. Godzilla was no longer being treated merely as a reliable commercial property or nostalgic icon. Instead, the character was being approached as a culturally significant cinematic figure requiring artistic intentionality and creative seriousness. This approach is especially meaningful because the Godzilla franchise has existed for more than 70 years and evolved through many creative phases. Across dozens of films, the series has shifted between horror, satire, science fiction, action, fantasy, and family entertainment. Some entries became legendary classics, while others were viewed as less artistically ambitious. After Godzilla Minus One, however, audience expectations changed dramatically. The film proved that a Godzilla movie could compete at the highest levels of international cinema while maintaining emotional depth, historical relevance, and visual excellence. As a result, Toho faced enormous pressure regarding whatever project would follow. Simply producing another large monster spectacle would not satisfy audiences who had emotionally connected with Minus One's themes of trauma, survival, guilt, and hope. Ichikawa's emphasis on intentionality therefore reflects an understanding that the future of the franchise depends on thoughtful storytelling rather than repetition. The studio recognized that Godzilla Minus One succeeded not merely because of visual effects or monster action, but because it treated its narrative and characters with sincerity and emotional gravity. This deliberate mindset also demonstrated confidence. Toho did not need to rush another movie into production because Godzilla Minus One had already restored immense prestige to the franchise. The film won international awards, achieved major box office success, and became widely regarded as one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made. The studio therefore had the luxury of prioritizing quality over speed. The official announcement on November 1, 2024, that a new Godzilla film had been greenlit immediately generated massive excitement throughout the global film community. One of the most significant aspects of the announcement was Takashi Yamazaki's return as writer, director, and visual effects supervisor. This decision carried enormous importance because Yamazaki had become deeply associated with the creative rebirth of Godzilla. His work on Godzilla Minus One demonstrated an extraordinary ability to balance emotional storytelling, historical atmosphere, symbolic meaning, and large-scale spectacle. Audiences and critics trusted his artistic vision because he had successfully reconnected the franchise to its thematic roots while modernizing it for contemporary viewers. Having Yamazaki return in all three major creative roles suggested continuity not only in storytelling but also in artistic philosophy. He would again oversee the narrative, emotional tone, and and visual identity of the project. This level of creative control is relatively rare in blockbuster filmmaking and likely contributed significantly to the coherence and emotional power of Minus One. The fact that the announcement did not clarify whether the movie would be a direct sequel or a standalone film added another layer of intrigue. This ambiguity reflected the unusual position the franchise found itself in after Minus One. The previous film ended with emotional closure while simultaneously leaving unresolved mysteries, such as Noriko's condition and Godzilla's regenerating flesh. Fans naturally expected continuation, yet Yamazaki and Toho seemed cautious about defining the next project too narrowly. This uncertainty suggested that the filmmakers were still carefully exploring the best creative direction rather than forcing a sequel simply because audiences demanded one. The ambiguity also aligned with the broader history of Japanese Godzilla cinema. Unlike many Hollywood franchises that rely heavily on rigid continuity, Japanese Godzilla films have often reinvented or reinterpreted the character according to different historical moments and artistic goals. Some eras followed continuous storylines, while others functioned as independent reinterpretations. By not immediately confirming the exact nature of the new film, Toho preserved creative flexibility. Yamazaki could potentially continue the emotional world of Minus One while still introducing new ideas, themes, or narrative structures. Yamazaki's comments at the 23rd Visual Effects Society Awards in February 2025 offered further insight into the scale and ambition of the upcoming project. His announcement that storyboarding and scripting were already underway demonstrated that serious creative development had begun, but perhaps even more important was his statement that the new movie would likely cost more than Godzilla Minus One. This detail is highly significant because one of the most remarkable aspects of Minus One was its extraordinary achievement on a comparatively modest budget. The film became famous for delivering world-class visual effects and emotional spectacle with far fewer resources than major Hollywood blockbusters. Many critics and filmmakers praised the movie as proof that creativity, discipline, and strong storytelling matter more than enormous budgets alone. The suggestion that the next film would have a larger budget immediately sparked discussion about what Yamazaki might accomplish with expanded resources. Audiences already considered the visual effects in Minus One astonishing given the financial limitations. A larger budget potentially meant even more ambitious destruction sequences, larger scale environments, more detailed creature animation, and broader cinematic scope. However, the possibility of increased funding also created questions about balance. Part of Godzilla Minus One's charm and effectiveness came from its restraint and focused storytelling. The film used visual effects carefully and purposefully, ensuring every spectacle sequence carried emotional weight. Fans therefore hoped that a larger budget would enhance Yamazaki's artistic vision rather than encouraging empty excess. Fortunately, his previous work suggested he understood that emotional storytelling must remain the foundation of the franchise. The progression from Minus One to a more expensive production also symbolizes how dramatically the film changed industry perceptions of Japanese blockbuster cinema. Before its release, few expected a Japanese Godzilla movie to achieve such global success and critical acclaim. Afterward, studios and investors recognized that these films possessed enormous international potential when executed with artistic ambition. Bloomberg's April 2025 report confirming that a sequel was indeed in development effectively ended much of the speculation surrounding the future of the franchise. This confirmation was important because it suggested that Toho ultimately decided the emotional and narrative world established in Minus One deserved continuation rather than replacement. A sequel carries unique creative opportunities because the first film already established deep emotional connections between audiences and characters. Viewers became invested not only in Godzilla itself but also in the lives of Shikishima, Noriko, Akiko, Tachibana, and the surviving members of the Minesweeper crew. Continuing their stories allows the filmmakers to explore themes rarely addressed deeply in monster franchises: long-term trauma, rebuilding after catastrophe, lingering psychological scars, and the consequences of survival. These themes distinguished Minus One from many blockbuster films and likely remain central to Yamazaki's creative interests. Koji Ueda's suggestion that the sequel could arrive in 2026 also demonstrated Toho's confidence in the franchise's renewed global popularity. Releasing another major Godzilla film relatively soon after Minus One indicates that the studio recognized an opportunity to maintain momentum while public enthusiasm remained high. At the same time, the timeline still allowed several years of development. This balance reflected the studio's desire to avoid rushing the project while still building upon the extraordinary cultural impact of the previous movie. The eventual announcement on November 3, 2025, that the sequel would be titled Godzilla Minus Zero immediately generated enormous discussion because of the title's symbolic implications. The original title, Godzilla Minus One, already carried profound thematic meaning. It suggested that post-war Japan existed below zero, a nation already devastated beyond ordinary loss before Godzilla even appeared. The phrase minus one symbolized absolute despair, national ruin, emotional emptiness, and the collapse of identity after World War II. Godzilla then pushed Japan even further into catastrophe. The title Godzilla Minus Zero therefore raises fascinating questions about thematic direction. Numerically, minus zero implies movement toward an even more unstable or paradoxical state. It suggests that the story may explore what happens after survival itself, after characters attempt to rebuild but continue living under the shadow of unresolved trauma and lingering destruction. The title could symbolize multiple ideas simultaneously. It may refer to Japan trying to return from devastation back toward zero, meaning stability or normalcy. Alternatively, it could imply that true recovery remains impossible because Godzilla's curse continues infecting society and individuals. The phrase also carries existential implications. If Minus One explored survival amid despair, Minus Zero may examine identity and meaning after catastrophe has fundamentally transformed people and nations. The story could focus less on immediate destruction and more on lingering consequences. This interpretation aligns strongly with Yamazaki's earlier comments comparing Godzilla's aftermath to the Tatarigami curse from Princess Mononoke. In that framework, Godzilla does not simply destroy cities, the creature leaves behind corruption, trauma, and spiritual contamination that persist long after the physical attacks end. The sequel title therefore suggests continuation not only of the narrative but also of the emotional and symbolic themes that made Minus One resonate globally. Another important aspect of the sequel's development is how it reflects changing global attitudes toward international cinema. The success of Godzilla Minus One demonstrated that audiences worldwide were eager for emotionally authentic storytelling regardless of language or country of origin. As a result, Godzilla Minus Zero entered production with a level of international anticipation rarely seen for a Japanese live-action film. The movie was no longer viewed merely as domestic entertainment for Japanese audiences or niche genre fans. It became a globally anticipated cinematic event. This transformation highlights how deeply Minus One reshaped the cultural status of Godzilla itself. For decades, the franchise alternated between serious artistic recognition and lighter pop culture entertainment. After Minus One, Godzilla once again became associated with profound storytelling, historical symbolism, and emotional resonance. Yamazaki's continued involvement also reassured audiences that the franchise would preserve its emotional sincerity. One of the greatest strengths of Minus One was its refusal to undermine dramatic moments with excessive irony or self-awareness. The film treated its characters' suffering and fears with honesty and compassion. Maintaining that tone in the sequel would be essential because audiences connected deeply with the humanity of the previous story. The monster action mattered because viewers genuinely cared about the people experiencing the destruction. The announcement cycle surrounding Godzilla Minus Zero therefore became more than routine franchise news. It represented the continuation of a creative renaissance for one of cinema's most iconic characters. Ultimately, the development of the new Godzilla film reflects the enormous legacy of Godzilla Minus One. The careful planning, artistic ambition, and emotional seriousness surrounding the sequel reveal how profoundly the previous movie changed expectations for what a Godzilla film could achieve. Rather than rushing to exploit commercial success, Toho and Yamazaki approached the future of the franchise with patience and respect. They recognized that Godzilla's enduring power comes not simply from spectacle, but from the creature's ability to embody human fears, historical trauma, and the struggle to survive catastrophe. The production history, financial background, historical positioning, and cultural details surrounding Godzilla Minus One reveal how extraordinary the film truly was within the modern film industry. While audiences around the world celebrated the movie for its emotional storytelling and spectacular visuals, many of the most fascinating aspects of its success exist behind the scenes. The film's relatively small budget, its place within the Reiwa era of Godzilla cinema, its relationship to Hollywood's monsterverse, and even small lore details such as Noriko's mysterious black mark all contribute to understanding why Godzilla Minus One became such a monumental achievement in global filmmaking. One of the most widely discussed topics surrounding the film was its production budget. After the movie's release, international audiences were shocked by the quality of the visual effects compared to the relatively low financial cost of the production. Many media outlets reported that the film cost approximately $15 million, which already seemed astonishingly low considering the scale of destruction, creature animation, period recreation, and cinematic spectacle visible throughout the movie. However, director Takashi Yamazaki repeatedly clarified that the actual budget was even lower than many reports suggested. According to his comments, the real figure existed somewhere between $10 million and $15 million, and he consistently denied claims that the production had reached the full $15 million amount. Later industry estimates moved increasingly closer to approximately $10 million. To fully understand how extraordinary this is, it is important to compare the film to typical modern blockbuster productions. Many Hollywood franchise films routinely cost between $150 million and $300 million or more. Large-scale superhero movies, science fiction epics, and visual effects-heavy action films often involve enormous teams of artists, extended shooting schedules, worldwide marketing campaigns, and massive digital production pipelines. By comparison, Godzilla Minus One achieved visual quality and emotional spectacle that many viewers considered superior to films costing more than 10 times as much. This discrepancy became one of the defining stories surrounding the movie's success. The relatively modest budget also changed discussions about modern visual effects filmmaking. Audiences and critics increasingly questioned how Godzilla Minus One managed to deliver such convincing destruction, detailed creature animation, and cinematic atmosphere with comparatively limited resources. The answer lies partly in Takashi Yamazaki's creative approach. As both director and visual effects supervisor, he maintained unusually strong control over the relationship between storytelling and visual effects. Rather than treating spectacle as separate from narrative, the effects were designed specifically to enhance emotional impact. Every destruction sequence in the film serves a dramatic purpose. Godzilla's attacks are not random displays of digital chaos, they are emotionally grounded events experienced directly through human characters. Because the filmmakers focused carefully on perspective, scale, atmosphere, and tension, the visuals feel far more powerful than many larger-budget productions. The film also benefited from disciplined planning and efficient resource allocation. Instead of overwhelming audiences with non-stop action scenes, Yamazaki used visual effects selectively and strategically. This restraint made each major sequence feel meaningful and memorable. Another important factor was the expertise of the Japanese visual effects teams involved in the production. The artists demonstrated extraordinary craftsmanship and efficiency, proving that creativity and artistic precision can sometimes compensate for financial limitations. The low budget became symbolic of something larger within the global film industry. Godzilla Minus One represented a challenge to the assumption that blockbuster filmmaking requires enormous spending to achieve emotional and visual success. The film reminded audiences that strong direction, clear artistic vision, and emotional storytelling matter more than sheer scale alone. The movie's production costs are even more remarkable when considering its historical setting. Recreating post-war Japan required extensive period detail, damaged city environments, military equipment, costumes, and atmospheric authenticity. The filmmakers successfully transported viewers into the devastated world of late 1940s Japan while maintaining visual realism and emotional intimacy. The budget discussion also became intertwined with the film's Academy Award success. After winning Best Visual Effects at the Oscars, Godzilla Minus One was celebrated not only as a great monster movie but also as a triumph of creative filmmaking efficiency. The victory inspired filmmakers and audiences worldwide because it suggested that artistic passion and ingenuity could still compete against massive studio budgets. Another fascinating aspect of the film involves its place within the Reiwa era of Godzilla cinema. Officially, Japan's Reiwa era began on May 1, 2019, following the end of the Heisei era. However, Toho's classification of the Godzilla franchise differs slightly from strict historical chronology. The studio considers Shin Godzilla and the Polygon Pictures animated trilogy to be part of the Reiwa era, even though some of these projects were released before the official political era began. This classification reflects how Toho views creative periods within the franchise not purely through calendar dates but through broader thematic and production identities. The Reiwa era represents a modern reinvention of Godzilla for contemporary audiences. Unlike earlier franchise periods that often maintained long-running continuity or recurring formulas, the Reiwa era embraces experimentation and reinterpretation. Shin Godzilla presented a terrifying political and bureaucratic satire focused on governmental paralysis during disaster.